大家好，您现在收看的是哈里说今年的首次直播。现在准备要发射的是联合发射联盟研发多年的火神半人马座甲烷运载火箭。这枚火箭预定于美东时间1月8号的凌晨2点18分，准备要在佛罗里达州的卡纳维尔角是发射升空。现在您可以看到这个画面的这个右边呢，主萤幕上是准备要发射的发射场画面。今天是在卡纳维尔角的41号发射场进行发射。整个的发射窗口大约是持续是45分钟。先前气象预报表明今天这个天气状况大概有85%的几率适合发射。我们来听现场的一些相关解说。
Meteor impacts take place because if we see them in the moon, they actually happened at the same time at Earth, maybe around the same time life was forming at Earth. You could also look at the moon, and we might be interested in using water ice that's at the south pole of the moon, we expect, for our astronauts in the future. But understanding how that ice got there, how that water got there in the first place, will help us understand how do we have water at Earth that we get to use today.
我们可以听到现场在解说这个月球上面的一些状况。这一次是首次的认证发射，这一次半人马座上面有2个有效的载荷。第一个就是提到的民间企业的游隼登月着陆器，第二个有效载荷是太空葬礼公司将装着338人的骨灰胶囊和 DNA 样本是运往太空，要进行释放。我们来听听现场的相关解说。
Things continue to go as planned as we look forward to the launch of ULA's first Vulcan rocket. We're still holding at T-minus 7 minutes as part of our planned 60-minute hold, and the team is not working any issues at this time. The Vulcan booster is fueled to flight level with super-chilled liquid oxygen and liquid methane. Soon, Centaur topping to flight levels will begin, and the ULA team is on track for an on-time liftoff at 2:18:38 a.m.
可以听到这个 ULA 也就是联合发射联盟的现场解说，目前推进剂还在装填当中目前这个距离发射是暂时是 hold 在这个7分钟左右真正的发射时间是在美国东岸2点18分，就是8号清晨的2点18分，所以还有将近这个30-40分钟的时间了。面对 SpaceX 的强力竞争，曾经的火箭之王 ULA 联合发射联盟希望利用这一枚的火神半人马座火箭来取代老旧且高价的 Delta 三角洲与这个 Atlas 擎天神火箭，来增加他们的运载发射的竞争能力。那现在您看到画面的这个是这一家这个民间企业准备要发射这个游隼登月着陆器的公司准备登月的着陆器游隼是阿提米斯登月建立月球基地前导商业计划的一部分。这是整个阿提米斯大计划其中的一个小的环节主要的功用就是扶植这个民间的企业，能够为未来的太空来运送一些物资有点像是这个扶持这个地球上的 UPS 或是 Federal Express 这样的一些快递公司，能够协助把一些相对不太重要的物资交由民间企业未来往月球上去输送。我们都知道在2023年曾经对于民间企业登陆太空抱有相当大的期望但是这个日企iSpace 着陆器去年失联后，今天这个首个民企登月着陆器游隼可以不可以成功登陆月球也值得关注。我们来听相关的一些解说。
Professional engineer, science and operations lead for the LETS payload. The Linear Energy Transfer Spectrometer is a small, low-power radiation detector based on Timepix technology developed at CERN.
It's similar to devices that we've flown on ISS and Artemis. The science we're expecting to get from the LETS detector is take that information and translate it from deposited energy in silicon, which is what we measure with this detector, into a more biologically equivalent
value that we can utilize for crew protection. One of the key pieces, I think, that if we can capture would be outstanding is getting data from a radiation event, a solar storm on the moon, while crew are not there. That would be ideal from the standpoint of being able to get the data without putting crew at risk, and then utilizing that data to prepare for crew protection during the lunar operations.
Now, NASA's Science Technology Mission Directorate had a hand in today's launch. So here with me now is Nikki Werkheiser, Director of Technology Maturation. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
So tell me how STMD, that's the shortened version of the directorate there, tell me how it invests in small business like Astrobotic.
Of course. So the Space Technology Mission Directorate, our mantra is technology drives exploration.
现在这个 NASA 的这个科技方面的总监呢，正在解释为什么NASA 在新的阿提米斯计划当中啊，要扶植一些小企业来参与准备这个登月的着陆器游隼可以说是阿提米斯计划非常重要的一环。游隼着陆器如果顺利登陆这个月球，将会是自阿波罗计划于1972年最后一次运送着陆器在月球以来时隔50多年，美国再次有着陆器是尝试登月，可以说是这个时隔50年的另外一项的一个创举。我们也知道，在过去几年，无论是这个嫦娥或是印度新的着陆器都已经成功登陆月球。美国这个上一次有着陆器登陆月球还是50多年前所以今天的这一枚这个火神半人马座能不能顺利运载这个游隼成功在月球登陆，将会是非常值得的关注焦点。
The thing is, if you'd asked me as a child, of course, it's the amazing engineering and science feats that we see happening. But as a child that was raised in a family of a small business, doing this together with small businesses, this being our NASA and going together to the moon, is really just incredible.
Yeah, just what do you think about that? Again, that we're bringing in as many as we.
目前现场还在继续解说这个推进剂也正在装填当中。目前倒计时的时间是暂时这个 hold 住在这个发射前的7分钟。我们来继续来听这个现场的相关解释。
After Peregrine 1 today, Astrobotic will deliver another payload for us, and that's our Viper rover later this year. Right now, teams across NASA are busy working on Viper, another important lunar delivery. Viper is short for Volatiles Investigating Polar Exploration Rover. But what are volatiles, and why is NASA looking for them? Volatiles are substances that easily evaporate. And one of the most important volatiles NASA is trying to map on the moon is water. Water is critical for deep space exploration because you can drink it, but also turn it into oxygen for breathing and hydrogen for fuel. NASA has selected Astrobotic for Viper's lunar delivery under CLPS, or the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Initiative. And when Viper gets to the moon, it will search for ice on and under the lunar surface near the moon's south pole.
现在介绍短片，正在介绍这个民间企业这个参与运载作业的重要性未来他们还将会运载这个着陆器到这个接近月球南极的地方去探寻这个水冰的存在。水冰对于未来进一步发展阿提米斯计划可以说是至关重要，因为如果熟悉这项计划的朋友应该了解未来的登月计划当中所谓的科研人员以及所谓的宇航员太空人会在月球驻扎较长一段时间。这时候如果能够借由这个水冰的发现能够对于无论在科研以及系统维持上都会有较大的一个注意。 这是目前在研发的过程。我们利用这一阵时间来看今天准备发射的火神半人马火箭。这是一枚非常特别是结合多家美国军工航太巨头外加太空新创公司蓝色起源的一枚组合型的怪兽。它的第一节核心段使用的是贝佐斯蓝色起源新开发的 BE4 甲烷的异氧引擎这是新研发的一枚引擎。这枚火神半人马座火箭可以说是结合了波音、洛克希德马丁、洛克达因和诺斯洛普格鲁曼4大的航太巨头，外加太空新创蓝色起源的技术，可以说是5大这个太空公司是合力要来对抗 SpaceX 的杰作。这几年是靠着回收技术来降低成本，加上猎鹰9、猎鹰重型运载成为这个高低配让 SpaceX 在火箭发射服务提供许多的选择，在报价上其实更有吸引力。这也使得这个老牌的联合发射联盟订单可以说是不断流失。我们来看现场有没有最新的一些 update。
My name is Tony Colapri. I'm the lead scientist for the Near-Infrared Volatile Spectrometer System, or NIRVIS. The NIRVIS instrument combines 3 observations. It has a spectrometer that tells us about the composition of the lunar soil. It has a high-resolution camera that tells us about the fine-scale structures of that soil. And it has a temperature measurement that tells us the temperature of the lunar regolith. NIRVIS combines all these 3 measurements to help us better understand the compounds that are...
现在还在讲述这个月球探勘的一些设备，一些非常重要的设备我们刚刚提到这一枚的火神半人马火箭非常特别事实上也就是联合发射联盟现在是遭受非常大的营运压力在一般商业订单上SpaceX 现在已经超过联合发射联盟。至于原来联合发射联盟最看重的国防订单SpaceX 与 ULA 现在已经是4-6开，差距也可以说是逐渐缩小。为了不坐以待毙，联合发射联盟可以说是花费多年来研发这种较便宜、结合新旧思路，同时兼顾政治正确的火箭希望能够扭转局势这枚火箭大概是2014年就开始研发，距离现在发射可以说是9年多，将近10年的时间。我们来听现场的相关解说。
ULA will join us in just a few seconds.
Good morning. I'm Amanda Sterling, a program management leader and your host for ULA's live coverage of the inaugural Vulcan launch. I'm joining you from ULA's Advanced Spaceflight Operations Center at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida.
您可以看到左上角目前发射时间是暂时停驻在距离发射前7分钟，预定发射时间还有将近20多分的时间，所以当时间迫近这个倒计时的时间才会开始倒数火神半人马火箭的上层段，也就是第2节，用的是另一家百年大厂 Aerojet Rocketdyne 的洛克达因航太 RL10 的老式引擎，助推段用的是这个领域的老手航太国防巨头诺斯洛普格鲁曼所打造的一个固体燃料的助推段至于第1节的核心段使用的是贝佐斯蓝色起源新开发的 BE4 引擎，这可以说是美国5家的航太巨头所联合组成的发射联盟，准备要开发一个新型的火箭，可以 对抗 SpaceX 在猎鹰9号系列以及猎鹰重型火箭所取得的一个成功哦。火神半人马火箭诞生跟国际政治其实有很大的关系哦，特别是2014俄乌冲突开始，就是第一次在克里米亚半岛发生冲突开始哦，联合发射联盟被迫逐步停用俄罗斯便宜又好用的 RD-180 引擎，必须要开发自己的新火箭，才能继续拿到国防订单。刚好这时候，太空新秀蓝色起源也开始研发新引擎，未来也将委外是发射卫星，于是双方展开合作。加上这个蓝色起源早就对 SpaceX 抢下多张的 NASA 太空订单呢感到不满，自然是结成同盟啊。这是这一段这个开发跟研发的一个过程。
System that's flexible. We have the ability to add solid rocket boosters, take them off, to tailor the performance that we need for that particular customer's mission. We have an
extremely capable upper stage in the Centaur 5 that provides performance that exceeds all the capabilities that our customer needs. And
in the end, we've got a launch system that exceeds all of our national security customers' requirements and enables us to provide performance for commercial customers or other customers.
另外，我们刚刚也提到，这个火神火箭它有一大特点，它就是结合这个新旧不同的思路哦。像是火神的构造虽然是传统型的火箭，不像星舰，你一看外形就知道它有很大的差别啊。但是啊，火神火箭把最近流行的回收火箭的新概念啊，也可以是说融入设计当中啊。只不过火神火箭不像这个 SpaceX 整组回收。联合发射联盟是透过安排跟布置啊，只打算拆解火箭上面高价的零组件来回收使用。另外，核心段的 B4 引擎则会用非常特别的方式返回地球，降落海面，然后回收再利用。另外，火神的发动机啊，也可以说是结合各种的设计思维啊。像是第二节采用的是洛克达因航太的 R10 老派的发动机，这是美国历史上研制的第一种液态氢液态氧火箭引擎，助推段用的则是固态引擎。至于核心段蓝色起源的 B4 引擎，用的是最近爆火的液态氧甲烷发动机哦，所以你可以看到他们运用各种不同的引擎，特别是有这个老牌的这个 R10， 同时也用了这个固体火箭，也用了这个甲烷的发动机哦，可以说是结合各种不同的思考模式所打造出来的这个火神火箭哦，究竟能不能成功哦？待会就可以揭晓。
Change to the upper stage would give us increased performance and ability to lift more spacecraft to the low Earth orbit. And really position us well for supporting the Kuiper contract and our Kuiper customer.
Yeah. And the result of that was the largest launch contract ever. And so with that, Vulcan has positioned ULA to help support national security, NASA, and our commercial market. So we're very excited about the future. Go Vulcan, go Centaur, go Cert-1.
I'm now joined by ULA President and CEO Tori Bruno. Tori, thank you so much for joining us on this monumental day.
现在把这个联合发射联盟的执行长这个 Bruno 也搬出来，他是一个非常有代表性的人物哦。他不像这个马斯克这么上很多的社交媒体，但是呢，他本身也是很有特色。你可以看到他这个戴个牛仔帽，或者是在一些场合出现了，也是非常抢镜头的一个人物哦。至于这个画面的主荧幕比较大的这个视框哦，可以看到是发射场目前的画面。
While also not making the mistakes of the past.
Absolutely, and Vulcan is such a unique rocket. What are you most proud of about this vehicle?
I'm really proud of the fact that we still service the high energy marketplace, a unique thing that is really important to our nation's security, that no one else has an architecture that will do that, while at the same time breaking all the rules and having the dial-a-rocket architecture that gives it the flexibility to reach down into that LEO marketplace and be very competitive there as well.
Absolutely. So we're getting pretty close to liftoff now. How do you expect to feel watching the Vulcan rocket lift off for the first time?
Tremendous excitement and anticipation.
现在在访问的是 ULA， 也就是这个联合发射联盟的执行长。现在距离预定的发射时间大概还有18分钟，倒计时的时间在左上角是暂时 hold 住在这个倒数7分钟哦，也就是说当时间迫近才会开启这个倒计时的时间。至于背景则是联合发射联盟的这个控制中心，您现在看到是发射场的画面。
Commercial Lunar Lander. Peregrine is the first spacecraft in NASA's new CLIPS initiative to have American companies send its science experiments to the moon.
Astrobotic is a full-service lunar company. It starts with our terrestrial testing and development services.
现在现场在介绍的是准备在月球着陆的有准登月着陆器的开发公司的一个访问的画面。如果您现在才加入我们，我们目前在等待的是联合发射联盟研发多年的火神半人马座甲烷运载火箭，准备要在16分钟以后于佛罗里达州卡纳维尔角41号发射场进行首次的发射。这一次半人马座上面有2个有效载荷，一个就是您看到现在画面上的民间企业有准登月着陆器，第2个相当有意思，是为太空葬礼公司把装着338人的骨灰胶囊跟 DNA 样本是运往太空进行释放。火神半人马座运载火箭在研发的过程可以说一波三折最早可以推到2014年就有这个设计的构想，原因是这个波音跟洛克希德马丁的2枚运载火箭岁月这个使用都已经非常长的时间，最重要的还是他们发射的成本太高。没有办法让联合发射联盟可以应付这个SpaceX 在价格方面的挑战，所以不得不研发新的火箭来加以因应希望能够降低成本。我们刚才前面也说这个新的火神半人马火箭是结合新旧思维所以它是利用各种不同组合的方式，光是这个发动机就有好几种形态，希望借此能够降低发射成本。我们来听现场的相关解说。目前现场还在等待发射中。
The American flag across the inner stage, as well as logos on the payload fairing representing ULA, Vulcan, and Astrobotic. While this is the inaugural launch of the Vulcan rocket, the CERT-1 flight test marks ULA's 159.
在这边要预告一下，如果今天一切进行顺利发射，整个发射过程会非常长，因为一直发射到任务结束会长达4个小时24分45秒左右因为半人马座分离以后到这个所谓有准的登月着陆器分离要50分钟的时间。另外半人马座会一直飞它会飞到这个太阳轨道，那已经是好几天以后的时间。至于有准登月着陆器在月球表面降落，则要等到2月23号以后，这是一切顺利发射以后的一些 发射状况啊。现在在介绍这枚火箭的组成，我们赶快来听听这一枚首发的火箭。
Operational silence in the LCC. Go Lock 2. Center L2 at flight level. Roger. Terminal count briefing. If the condition exceeds a launch constraint, anytime after the terminal count status check, the observer shall announce hold on channel 1, identify their station, and briefly state the reason for the hold. RLM, verify redline monitor and event table and the correct configuration for terminal count.
Verified.
As we approach the terminal count pole, let's check in on today's weather. The Space Launch Delta 45 forecast for this morning's launch is looking good. The probability of violating launch constraints is 15%. Ground winds are 15 to 20 knots out of the north, and the temperature is 57 degrees Fahrenheit.
待会这个指挥中心会一一唱明就各个部分来进行最后的确认。目前天气状况来说，可以有高达85%的几率是适合发射。我们看到有朋友这个灵魂拷问，就是有准登月着陆器最重要的功能是什么？它上面运载了，我如果没记错的话，会有几十部的仪器和机器最主要一个任务就是帮助 NASA 去定位这个可能找到水冰，月球上水冰的一个地点这个上面有大批的仪器，当然有各种不同的功能最主要是这个帮助 NASA 先一步去定位水冰的存在，为往后的阿提米斯任务进行布置。哇，你可以看到现在控制中心的画面非常壮观。现在进行最后的点名确认我们来听听。
Go. Hydraulics. Go.
Pneumatics. Go.
LNG. Go. LO2.
Go.
Water.
Go.
Centaur systems. Propulsion. Go. Pneumatics. Go. LO2. Go. LH2.
Go.
打个岔，这是我最喜欢的环节听到每个部门都顺利正常，希望今天一切顺利发射升空，几十个部门进行唱名确认。
Operation support. Go. Com. Go. Umbilicals. Go. ECS. Go. Redline monitor. Go. Quality. Go. Op safety manager. Go. ULA safety officer. Go. Vehicle system engineer.
Go.
Anomaly chief. Go. Range coordinator.
Clear to proceed.
Launch director.
You have permission to launch.
Proceeding with the count. ALC, verify T0 is set for 07 18 38 Zulu. Verified.
Polling is complete, and the team is go for launch. From T-7 minutes.
好消息是，目前各部门都已经点名确认适合今天的发射。
In the final minutes before launch, including verifying fuel tank levels and pressures in the booster and Centaur, and arming the flight termination system. At T-1 minute, the Range Operations Commander confirms the range is in a green condition for launch. At T-25 seconds, you'll hear Go Vulcan, Go Centaur, Go Peregrine. This is the final status check of rocket and payload readiness. At T-7 seconds, Rofi sparklers will ignite, followed a second later by initiation of the launch pad water deluge system. At T-3 seconds, the main engines ignite. Then, after seeing Vulcan's first ever liftoff from Slick 41, you'll begin hearing flight commentator Rob Gannon providing launch vehicle ascent data.
可以看到，在倒数前7秒钟，这个地面这个喷射抑制系统，就是洒水系统会启动。在发射前3秒到4秒的话 ，BE4 的引擎会点火。目前还在静待这个指挥中心进一步的指令。
This is Vulcan Mission Control at T-7 minutes and holding. We anticipate releasing the hold in just a few moments.
现在倒计时时间还是暂时停在倒数前7分钟。
The time will be T-7 minutes and counting. 3, 2, 1, mark.
您可以注意左上角的倒计时时间哦，已经开始启动，现在是6分52秒。
Go for launch at 2:18:38 a.m. Eastern.
哇，他们想拼这个2点18分准时发射，这个算是很厉害。如果您看到很多新创这个企业发射，有时候拖上好几个小时都有可能。当然，今天的发射窗口只有45分钟，也拖不得。好了，他们要开始介绍这个火神半人马火箭，我们来听听半人马火箭它的介绍。这个第一节是所谓火神火箭，中程段也就是第2节是所谓半人马座。
Shortly after liftoff, the rocket begins a pitchover to attain the proper flight path, while minimizing the dynamic pressure it experiences during flight.
Vulcan then reaches Mach 1, the speed of sound. With the ability to add 2, 4, or 6 solid rocket boosters, or SRBs, Vulcan can be precisely configured to take any...
这边插个话，就是火神半人马座，你可以看到它旁边加装的这个固体燃料的助推器可以加2枚、加4枚、加6枚，可以增加它的运载能力这种组合型的方式会不会觉得跟猎鹰重型有一点相似呢？所有的观念可以说是互相借鉴也让这个太空发射的这个技术可以说是越来越成熟，越来越进步。
First stage flight continues as the rocket crosses the Kármán line, entering space. With the majority of propellant expended as Vulcan fights against the force of gravity,
the BE4 engines shut down, and the booster stage separates. With the rocket now weighing less than 10% of what it did at liftoff, dual RL-10C engines on ULA's Centaur upper stage ignite. Spacecraft are encapsulated inside a 5.4-meter diameter payload fairing, which provides a protective environment during ascent. Following Centaur engine ignition, the payload fairing is jettisoned. With the first burn complete, the Centaur engine shuts down for a coast phase. Centaur flies a short, medium, or long coast, which is determined by launch day. Further into flight, Centaur ignites for a second burn, powering the vehicle into a translunar injection orbit. Following the second main engine cutoff, ULA Centaur places Astrobotic's Peregrine Lunar Lander
into a highly elliptical orbit, more than 220,000 miles above Earth, where it will intercept the Moon.
距离火神半人马火箭首发3分55秒。
Centaur completes the CERT-1 mission by carrying Celestis' Memorial spaceflight payload into deep space. Known as the Enterprise flight, this mission includes 234 flight capsules containing cremated remains, DNA samples, and messages of greetings from clients worldwide on an endless journey in interplanetary space beyond the Earth-Moon system to orbit the Sun forever.
好的，您可以看到这个倒计时的时钟目前正在走哦，目前距离发射3分15秒。3分钟。时间一点点迫近哦，距离这个预定发射时间只大概晚了1分钟左右，也就是说，他们还有40多分的窗口可以利用。
CLO2 PLP started.
在当年这个 ULA 就是联合发射联盟风光的时候 ，SpaceX 还不知道在哪里啊。当时他们有火箭之王的称号，几乎一半以上的运载火箭的发射任务都是由他们来执行。
T-2 minutes. The launch vehicle, payload, ground systems, and eastern range are go for launch.
哇！最新消息，目前这个地面以及这个监测中心都发出这个准备放行的讯号。我们来听现场解说。
And we're on track for an on-time liftoff at 2:18:38 a.m. Eastern Time.
FPS arm.
minute.
1分钟。
T-minus 1 minute.
Range status. Range green.
今天发射可以说非常重要，不但关系的这一枚火箭可以被成功啊，还关系未来的一些太空任务。因为火箭发射不成功，所有太空任务都是白搭。30秒。
E4 start box, go. Status check.
Go Vulcan.
Go Centaur. Go Peregrine.
15.
载具、发射器以及地面都放行。10秒。
9, 8, 7, 6,
5秒。
5, 4,
点火。
We have ignition.
哇，它发射角度为了要避开这个发射架，会有一点倾斜哦。哇，这个发射的过程非常非常的流畅，而且很有自信。
Two good SRBs, hitting peak pressure on the SRBs. Everything looking good.
等一下，在1分09秒的时候，这个速度会突破1马赫，也就是会突破音障。1分16秒会达到 Max Q， 也就是最大动压点。目前看起来一切正常啊。
Coming up on 60 seconds into the flight, everything looking good.
Two good engines, two good SRBs.
你可以看到右边哦，这个联合发射联盟很贴心，它告诉每一个关键点。现在我刚刚说的1分10秒是达到这个1马赫，也就是突破音速。接下来是 Max Q 1分16秒。
Everything looking good. We're rolling off on the SRBs. And we have cutoff on the SRBs. Coming up on jettison. And approximately 30
好的，接下来一个重头戏就是2个固体燃料的推进器要分离，就是两边这个亮点。叫 SRB， 也就是这个固体燃料助推段哦。哎，分离了。
Separation of both SRBs. Everything looking good. BE4s continue to operate normally.
OK， 2个这个固态燃料 SRB 成功分离弹射。
confirmation of solid rocket booster jettison. We have about 3 minutes until we reach our next mission event, booster engine cutoff.
OK， 火神段也就是他们叫 booster， 就是中间的核心段第一节啊，引擎关闭要在4分59秒左右，所以还有3分钟左右的时间。升空以后2分35秒了，现在距离4分58秒这个第一节引擎关闭啊，还有一段时间。第一节引擎关闭以后啊，然后第一节跟第二节也就是火神跟半人马座会进行分离，这跟新舰采用的热分离就先点火再分离是有一点不一样。
Vehicles continue to fly down the center of the range track. Everything looking good.
33 miles in altitude, 52 miles downrange, traveling at 4,000 miles per hour.
You see excellent performance out of the BE4.
现在看不到这个参数哦，不过根据现场解说人员特别提到，这个 BE4 也就是蓝色起源新开发的这2枚引擎啊，目前运作非常的 smooth， 而且非常流畅。
Steadily accelerating, a little over 2 Gs at this time. Good body rates. Nice and smooth operation of the booster.
升空3分45秒，距离4分59秒第一节引擎关闭还有1分钟左右的时间。下一个环节非常重要，也就是主引擎关闭，然后1、2节进行分离。
And the vehicle now weighs 1/4 of its liftoff weight as we pass through the Kármán line. Next mark we're looking for is boost phase chill down on the Centaur main engines. Booster mains continue to operate normally.
好的，目前 B4 运作一切正常。好，4分59秒，核心段主引擎要准备关闭，还有20秒。画面看起来并不是那么清楚啊，只有微光存在。OK， 4、3、2、1，主引擎，它没有适应图来做代替啊。好，接下来5秒钟后1、2节分离，现在成功进行分离。接下来这个半人马座的引擎要进行点火。5分，这时候进行点火，果真顺利点火。下一个程序是整流罩要抛离哦。等一下会看前面这个像是子弹壳的地方要分开来，成功分离，这是示意图。
Good steady state operating levels on the Centaur mains. 2 good engines. Gone to open loop control on Centaur PU.
接下来
This is
是
Vulcan Mission Control at T plus 5 minutes 57 seconds. We just heard flight commentator Rob Gannon confirm the successful completion of the early phase of today's flight, and all systems continue to operate nominally. Our next event, main engine cutoff, will occur in about 10 minutes.
好的，目前现场解说人员解释到目前发射为止一切都正常。接下来会有10分钟的空档，一直到这个发射后15分钟左右。这时候半人马座的第一次主引擎会进行关闭。现场人员笑容非常这个解忧
Absolutely, and developing a new rocket is an enormous endeavor of which you were a huge part. Again, we're still early, but how do you imagine the whole Vulcan team is feeling right now?
I feel like they have to be the same way, you know, smile ear to ear. I know the team is at all our sites, friends and family. They've been supporting us for many years to get to where we are, so I'm sure they are jumping up and down just like me. It's been amazing. How is the Vulcan rocket going to change the industry? Yeah, that's a great question. So Vulcan is very much based on our heritage rockets, the Delta IV and Atlas V vehicles. But we brought in a lot of new.
虽然现在距离任务整个成功，我们刚刚说这个整个任务要持续4个多小时，一直到50分钟左右，有准才会跟这个半人马座进行分离，而且半人马座会继续飞到这个环太阳轨道所以说是一个很长的一个过程。不过我们可以看到现场解说人员已经在讨论目前这个火神火箭对于未来的太空能够会带来什么样的改变也可以说是对这一枚火箭抱有相当大的期望。我们来听现场的讨论。
By the U.S. Space Force, and we will be ready to fly all of their important payloads for them.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll let you get back and watch the next mission event.
Congratulations again.
Thanks, Ethan.
Up on 500 seconds into the mission. Everything's looking good. Continuing to burn Centaur. Body rates right as expected. Steady acceleration, just under half a G. And we are now 235 miles in altitude, 836 miles downrange, traveling at 11,150 miles per hour. Continue to see nominal performance from Centaur. And approaching the halfway point of this first burn of Centaur, everything looks good. We're now 1,000 miles downrange, traveling at 11,500 miles per hour.
This is Vulcan Mission Control at T plus 10 minutes 7 seconds. Our next event, main engine cutoff, will occur in about 5 minutes. While we wait, I'm joined
现在发射是距离发射10多分钟在15多分钟的时候，半人马座的主引擎会第一次关闭。
So exciting! I ran outside so I could watch this thing lift off, and that was so cool. After so many years of development to watch this thing fly, that was fantastic.
Absolutely, I bet.
Yeah.
So, what is the data showing us so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've had a very quick look. Obviously, we're very early in the flight still, but I've taken a look at the SRB performance as well as the booster performance so far, and everything looks just spot on, just perfect. Fortunately, we've had a lot of these systems on Atlas and Delta for a long time.
目前发射已经是10分58秒，目前所有的数据监测一切正常。
The audience has seen us switch from this live view of the launch from our rocket cam to this animated representation of the vehicle in space. Can you talk a little bit about why we make that switch and
How this visual is populated?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we first lift off, we have a feed directly from the cameras that are on the rocket back to the launch site here. And so with that, we can get the video feed that we need in order to provide those images. As we get further downrange and we go over the horizon, we no longer have that direct link. And so we rely on NASA's teeter system to send telemetry from the vehicle back down to us on the ground. In that telemetry data, we get information like position and attitude and velocity, and so we use that to drive the animations you see here.
Okay, so we're looking at real data, what's happening, it's just a graphic of it instead of the real thing.
That's exactly right, yes.
Awesome, that's really cool. So, today right now we're in the first of 3 Centaur burns. Can you talk a little bit about why we need 3 burns and how we use those 3 burns to complete our mission today?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first burn performs our injection into low Earth orbit. Unfortunately, if we just continue that burn from that point in time, we wouldn't necessarily be aligned with where we need to be in order to get to the moon. So what we do after we get to low Earth orbit is we shut those engines down, we coast around until we get to the right spot to do that, and then we light those engines up again. When we do that and complete that burn, that will allow us to send the astrobotic Peregrine Lander onto the moon. So we shut those engines down again, we are ready to do that, and then start them up one more time in order to do the third burn. That's what's going to take Celestis' Enterprise mission out to deep space. So let's talk a little bit about where these things happen. We're going to go ahead and shut down the main engines on the Centaur when we get about halfway across the Atlantic Ocean. And then we're going to coast the rest of the way across the Atlantic Ocean, across Africa, and go ahead and start the engines up again when we get to Madagascar. And that's where we'll do the second burn. And then we coast again until we get about to Papua New Guinea. And when we get about to over Papua New Guinea, that's where we'll go ahead and do that third and final burn.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple of these key milestones that are ahead of us. What can everyone expect to see as far as the timeline of these mission events as they continue watching today?
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at the clock right now, looks like we've got about 2 minutes, a little over 2 minutes left here in the first burn of the upper stage. We're going to coast for about 30 minutes after that as we do that coast across the Atlantic Ocean and across Africa.
待会这个半人马座的主引擎会进行第一次关闭，总共在飞行过程会开关至少3次以上在预定在15分45秒左右会进行第一次的关机。
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us, and thanks for joining us today, and we'll let you get back to watching those next events.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Amanda.
Thanks.
The new system is steadily making the correction down to a nominal MR.
还有大概1分钟左右，主引擎要进行第一次的关闭。
1 minute, D'Amico. Both engines firing normally.
This is Vulcan Mission Control at T plus 15 minutes 30 seconds. We are approaching the first main engine cutoff. Let's listen in.
Coming up on MECO 1.
3秒。
onto open loop control on MECO. We have cutoff. Both engines show normal shutdown signatures.
好的，现在这个半人马座的主引擎第一次关机哦。
We are now in a 27-minute, 51-second coast duration to second burn of Centaur.
This is Vulcan Mission Control at T plus 16 minutes 20 seconds. We just heard flight commentator Rob Gannon confirm successful cutoff of the first main engine, and all systems continue to operate nominally. Our next event, Main Engine Start 2, will occur in about 27 minutes. At this time, we'll pass the broadcast back to the NASA team to continue with mission coverage through the coast phase.
因为距离再次点火还27分钟左右，所以现在现场先交还给这个 NASA， 也就是美国太空总署的控制中心转播台。
Welcome to the Space Coast of Florida, where we just witnessed the first launch of NASA's CLIPS initiative. It was a magnificent sight. Leaves me speechless, apparently. Just really lighting up the night sky and loud enough to set off a couple of car alarms nearby. CLIPS is short for Commercial Lunar Payload Services. It's a new model in which NASA contracts space on commercial missions to send science experiments to the moon ahead of us landing astronauts there. For today's launch, NASA selected Astrobotic to deliver its 5 lunar instruments. This is the first mission for its Peregrine spacecraft.
现在解说员又回到我们节目一开始所介绍，就是阿提米斯计划当中有一部分很大的计划是委外交由民间包商来进行研发啊。今天可以说是民间企业所参与太空任务的第一项重要环节，他们是委托这个民间公司来开发这个有准登月着陆器，也可以说是包含这一次发射当中相当重要的一个环节。我们来听现场的相关解说。
Our Peregrine Lander is on its way to the moon, and in about 2.5 weeks, it's going to go into orbit. And a few weeks later from that, in mid to late February, we're going to actually see it land, and that will be the first. Well, actually, it'll be one of the early landings on the moon since Apollo over 50 years, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. U.S. landings on the moon.
Yeah, it is. And the CLIPS is new as well. So talk to us a little bit about this program. We're using commercial companies to send science instruments to the moon for us. Why is that?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this program. It is a game-changing program for us. It really is leveraging industry in new ways. As you've probably seen, I mean, the whole aerospace industry has evolved over this last decade in amazing ways, and I think this is just yet one more step in doing so. So our commercial partners are actually delivering a service. They're delivering our payloads and other organizational payloads, whether it's other companies, whether it's international partners. Basically, anybody who wants to procure the service can deliver a payload to the moon using the CLIPS program.
And so there are 20 payloads flying on the Peregrine spacecraft right now. 5 of those are NASA's. Can you tell me a little bit about what they'll be studying once they get to the moon?
Yeah, so again, amazing service. So our payloads are going to be studying things, including understanding, studying water, studying the volatiles or the resources on the moon, studying the atmosphere, and also the radiation environment to help inform us for the future when we have humans back on the moon.
Sandra, thank you so much. I'm excited to see what we do with this initiative and this launch here today.
Thank you so much, and let me just say, go Vulcan and go Peregrine 1.
Yes, you can totally say that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, so when Peregrine lands on the near side of the moon on February 23rd, it will be one of the first lunar landings for the U.S. since the final Apollo mission over 50 years ago. Let's head back over to Astrobotics, Olivia Chapla.
Thanks, Megan, and what a great day so far. So for those of you just tuning in, I wanted to reintroduce myself. I'm Olivia Chapla, Director of Marketing and Communications for Astrobotic. Astrobotic is a space company with our primary headquarters.
这个 Astrobotic 就是开发有准着陆器的这一家公司啊。
Vulcan rocket. This Peregrine spacecraft's mission is to carry 20 payloads or cargo to the lunar surface from 7 different countries. 6 of those nations have never reached the moon before. Our aim is to autonomously land on the lunar surface a few weeks from now.
We're taking the long way around, and we expect Peregrine to land on February 23rd, 2024. We've got all eyes on the Peregrine.
他们预告一切顺利的话，会在2月23号会登陆这个月球表面，这又是一大盛事啊！希望到时候能够为您进行直播。现在是从这个地球轨道如何进行到地月转移轨道，然后进行绕月球飞行哦。
Because this is Peregrine's first ever trip to the moon, our team is not taking a direct path. Peregrine will first complete one Earth orbit so the team can get critical data on the spacecraft and test maneuvers before executing a very critical milestone, entering lunar orbit. Peregrine will orbit the moon at 3 altitudes. The first orbit will last about 33 hours. Peregrine's second orbit can be up to 35 days. The spacecraft's third and final orbit around the moon will last 48 hours. Next up, Peregrine will attempt a soft landing on the lunar surface autonomously. The team will issue a landing sequence that will command the spacecraft to enter.
您可以看到这个游准着陆器计划在接近这个月球的中纬度的地区是着陆。
While we wait for the Peregrine spacecraft to separate from the Vulcan rocket and begin that exciting journey to the moon, I have Astrobotics founder and Chief Executive Officer John Thornton.
Hi there, John. I understand you are currently at ULA, just a stone's throw from where I am now, and we both just saw ULA's Vulcan rocket
achieve liftoff with our very own Peregrine aboard. Tell me, after waiting for this moment for years, how are you feeling?
It's a dream. This is the moment we've been waiting for 16 years, and I'm standing in mission control, and we just had a beautiful launch. Thank you, ULA. So excited. We are on our way to the moon.
我们可以看到公司总裁非常的兴奋。
I can tell you and everyone else are in a really excited buzz today for sure. So tell me, what else do you think is the most important thing about our Peregrine mission today?
So this is the beginning of the dawn of a new era for the surface of the moon and how we think about space. This is an opportunity for commercial payloads to fly to the surface of the moon on a regular, routine basis. That means our nation's scientists, our world scientists, can access the moon in ways never before possible. And we are seeing the beginnings of that right now as we speak on our journey to the surface of the moon. Our first mission carries 20 payloads.
如果今天的发射任务一切正常，在2月23号这个游准登陆着月器登月着陆器能够一切顺利在月球表面进行平安的降落，将会开启人类向月球这个快递的一个新纪元也可以就是说是新的外送的一个途径就此诞生。
We had to overcome, and a lot of people doubted us along the way, but our team and the people that supported us believed in the mission,
and they created this beautiful moment that we're seeing today, working incredibly hard to make this possible. I can't thank the thousands of people between our team, our suppliers, our partners that have made this moment possible today. It's an unbelievable feat, and it is the culmination of all of everyone's effort coming together for this moment, believing in this possibility that a small company in Pittsburgh, of all places in this country, can lead America back to the surface of the moon.
Thank you, John. Well, I'll let you get back to the team that are in Florida with us as we wait for the Peregrine spacecraft to separate from Vulcan's rocket in about 30 to 40 minutes. For now, back to Megan.
Thanks, Olivia.
Oh, thank you.
Now, CLPS missions are an important step in returning to and staying on the moon. But these lunar landings that will help shape our future there are not without it.
Landing on the moon is hard. We're going back. Under this Artemis program, we're going to be sending humans to the moon for the first time since Apollo. So ahead of humans, we want to get up as much science exploration and technology experiments as possible.
So CLPS starts facilitating a lot of the early science, the things we want to learn before we even send humans. CLPS stands for Commercial Lunar Payload Services, CLPS.
The services part is the key element. Ordinarily, when NASA delivers a payload to the surface of the moon, they do it with a commercial partner, but NASA controls the building of the vehicle. Now, we're buying the service of delivery of our lunar payloads to the surface of the moon.
It is a delivery service, akin to a delivery service that you'd have here on Earth.
NASA will provide payloads to a commercial company. They decide how to get it to the moon. They have to develop their own lander, but they also have to manage the entire end-to-end mission.
It's meant to provide affordable, rapid, frequent access to the lunar surface through American companies.
We're funding different companies.
We have commercial companies that are competing to win task orders to deliver our payloads to the surface of the moon.
One of the goals when we started CLIPS was to help establish a lunar economy.
Somebody has to do it first, and then it becomes commercially available. Then they're able to crank them up. Then they're able to make it more affordable.
And so the lunar surface is just the next frontier for a commercial environment.
But we had to acknowledge up front, all the way through the highest levels of the agency's leadership, that some of them will fail. These missions may not be as successful as a traditional NASA mission.
We have accepted the risk that going through this innovative approach with these commercial companies, that there could be some failures. Some of them are new companies. None of them have ever successfully landed on the surface of the moon. So they're going to learn lessons.
We need to give our vendors the opportunity to learn.
And so that'll help ultimately buy down our risk as these companies learn, okay, what does it take to actually build up the lunar lander, integrate payloads, get to the lunar surface and land safely?
They've been able to demonstrate that they have very, very good technical depth and the ability to design and execute missions. We're willing to take more shots on goal. We aren't risking human lives. And in the big picture, if we're flying missions at 1/10 of the cost of a NASA mission, and we fail 2 of them, we still get 8 missions for that same price.
Even with 1 or 2 or 3 failures, this is still a very economical proposition. It's a risk posture which is more risk tolerant than NASA is accustomed to. There's not a single one of these companies that's willing to bet their mission on a coin toss. Every one of them is doing what they can in order to have the most successful mission possible. But the important thing to realize is that risk tolerant does not mean risky. And the rewards are a long-term ability to get payloads to the moon inexpensively, frequently, and rapidly.
We want science, so we can then put more of our resources on even more science, exploration, and technology payloads and get more of a return on investment when we get to the moon.
CLIPS provides tremendous benefit across the scientific and economic communities.
So there's a lot we'd like to learn about the moon to help human habitation and prepare us for missions to Mars and beyond.
So the moon is the first step.
And a lot has to happen before Peregrine lands safely on the moon. Astrobotic's Olivia Chapla shows how they tested the spacecraft here on Earth and what the team will do during its journey in space.
Peregrine has gone through quite a journey already and still has a long list of objectives to complete on its way to the moon. We've categorized these objectives into 5 stages, beginning with engineering it here on Earth. First, we built and tested a bolt-for-bolt engineering model of Peregrine. Based on our findings, we constructed the final spacecraft to send to the moon. Each iteration of Peregrine went through rigorous testing to ensure it will survive the harsh conditions of launch in space environments. Phase 2 objectives will begin when the spacecraft separates from the rocket. Once separated, Peregrine will power on and establish communications with Earth. At this stage, we'll receive telemetry informing us of the spacecraft's position, orientation, and general operational health. One of the first commands we send to the spacecraft will initiate thrusters to point Peregrine's solar panels at the sun to charge its battery.
We are planning for all of these objectives to be completed today. Next, and off-camera, our Phase 3 objectives begin. These objectives include trajectory adjustment maneuvers in space before lunar orbit insertion. After lunar insertion, Peregrine will complete 3 orbits around the moon. Then, the last phase of the mission begins, lunar landing and operations.
And for a closer look at landing, I'm joined now by Mike Hennessy, Educational Director of the Moonshot Museum in Pittsburgh. Good morning to you.
Good morning. It's spectacular to be here today.
Absolutely. We saw a launch, right?
Yeah, and it was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk to me about Peregrine and the spacecraft we have you on, because you know a lot about Peregrine and this mission. Why is that?
Well, every day I've had a front row seat at Peregrine under construction. I work at the Moonshot Museum, and we share a wall of windows with Astrobotic. And better yet, I've seen kids with their faces pressed against the glass, knowing they're going to grow up to become that next generation of makers that take us to the moon.
That's fantastic. And you also brought us some props here. So these are different parts, different materials that make up the multi-layer insulation. That's what goes around the spacecraft, right?
Right, that's the thermal protective space blanket for the craft. And we have a number of different materials here. This is Astro Quartz. It's a woven ceramic fiber, very heat resistant. We've got aluminum, which is great for reflecting solar heat. And this is also aluminum. Glitters a little more like gold, but it's just aluminum that's been covered with a polymer called Kapton. And you can see it actually on our model here. We have the Peregrine Lander.
Right here. This is the multi-layer insulation.
Yeah, we've got the multi-layer insulation, and that's wrapping these fuel tanks like cosmic baked potatoes.
And why do we need all these different materials?
Well, the moon is a harsh environment, and it takes a lot of technical know-how to land there. There's no atmospheric blanket like we have on Earth. So we need a thermal space blanket to protect against wild temperature extremes, boiling hot days, freezing cold nights, several hundred degrees below zero, and Peregrine's been engineered to endure that.
Okay, so now we know how it will be protected during landing. How will it land? What technologies are we using to make sure that it lands safely when you say that the moon isn't the easiest place to land on?
Right, and that's my favorite part of the story because this robot is going to land itself. Because we have about a 2.5 second signal delay from the Earth to the moon and back, it's like having a self-driving car going to another world. We have a full suite of sensors, gyroscopes, Doppler, LiDAR, star trackers, and a really cool technology called Terrain Relative Navigation, or TRN. About 9 miles out, Peregrine will activate its camera, and as it's descending, and the camera is taking pictures, the computer will be playing kind of a high-speed game of flashcards, comparing those pictures to 3D maps, and then Peregrine will have to make decisions in order to come to a landing. We're going to test drive this technology on Peregrine, and then on Astrobotic's next lunar lander, Griffin, TRN will be in the driver's seat when we head to the moon's south pole.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I know Griffin is going to be delivering another NASA payload, so another partnership where we get to do this together.
Yeah, I think another great example of how CLIPS is bringing together entrepreneurship and accelerating the pace of science and taking us out into the solar system.
Mike, thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All right, so the Astrobotic team hopes to land on the near side of the moon on February 23rd in a place called the Bay of Stickiness, a lunar feature formed by ancient hardened lava flow. It's located outside of the Gutheißen domes, which is the largest dark spot on the moon. Why does NASA want to conduct science here? Well, on Earth, formations like these domes need significant water and also plate tectonics to form. But without these key elements on the moon, lunar scientists have been left to wonder how the domes formed and evolved over time. We'll, of course, have coverage of the landing on our NASA Plus app or whichever social platform you watch us on. Now, earlier in the show, we told you about the NERVIS payload from NASA's Ames Research Center. The other payload from Ames is the Neutron Spectrometer System, or NSS.
I'm Rick Elphick. I'm the principal investigator of the Neutron Spectrometer System aboard the Peregrine 1 lander. NSS measures neutrons coming out of the lunar soil, and the neutrons tell you a lot about the makeup of the lunar soil. The neutrons that we measure with the neutron spectrometer are specifically related to the presence of hydrogen, the H in H2O, or water, and that's its real purpose, is to locate water, to actually act as a divining rod. Peregrine will be landing in a location where we really don't expect very much water, if any at all. But it's an interesting experiment. The exhaust system of its descent engines will actually spray paint the surface with its exhaust. And part of that exhaust is water, and some of that water is actually going to stick onto the surface of the moon. Then after we land,
NSS can monitor how that water goes away as the sun rises at the landing site and the day gets warmer and warmer. Water is really important as a resource for exploration. Astronauts need it for drinking water, but you can also use it by splitting it up into hydrogen and oxygen as rocket fuel. So if you can find water in place where you're going to, that means you can use it there and not have to bring it up from Earth.
Now, NASA has 2 more payloads flying to the moon today. We're going to tell you about both of them in just a few minutes. But first, let's introduce you all to Chris Culbert, Program Manager for CLPS out of NASA's Johnson Space Center. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Megan. Thank you. It's a wonderful day.
It is. We just watched the launch. What did you think?
It was amazing. Oh, my God. What a wonderful feeling. That rocket was gorgeous.
Yeah, and so NASA has 5 payloads hitching a ride. Tell me about the different things that they'll be studying and why they're studying those things.
So, this early mission for CLPS, this is our first mission. So our first 2 early missions are mostly carrying small instruments that help us learn more about the environment at the moon. As we get further into CLPS in future missions, we'll raise the complexity and start studying more complex, more difficult questions. But at the beginning, we're mostly trying to characterize what the moon is like, what the radiation does, what kind of environment we can find there. It doesn't have an atmosphere, but there's particles and dust and other things. We're trying to get more information about that so that we can help guide future human missions more effectively.
And how soon could we see data from some of those instruments so that we can start creating that fuller picture?
We'll start getting data back within hours of landing on the moon.
Wow.
Now, the scientists will need some time to analyze that information and turn it into the kind of information that helps guide future missions. But we should be getting data back from the moon within a few hours of landing, and we'll all the way for as long as 14 days on the moon. We'll be gathering that data. But the scientists will then take that information offline and analyze it for a while.
So basically, these missions, these instruments that we're sending, they're scouting the moon for us.
Yes. Yeah, they're telling us what the moon is like, helping us understand what we need to know so that we can take humans there safely. It also allows us to better design future instruments and other experiments that will pinpoint the kinds of things we need to know about the moon to be able to work and live there.
Chris, thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we're now less than a few minutes away until the Peregrine spacecraft separates from Vulcan's Centaur upper stage. We're going to go back to ULA for that milestone, but before that, another quick status update on Peregrine from Olivia.
Thanks, Megan. And now I'm checking in on Astrobotic's mission control team. In about 20 to 30 minutes, they're expecting Peregrine to power on and then try to communicate with them on the ground. Peregrine will establish ground communications with NASA's Deep Space Network, and then we will begin receiving telemetry. As we wait for those milestones, here's an in-depth look at the inner workings of the Peregrine Lunar Lander. And now we'll take a look at the Peregrine spacecraft. You'll notice that we've removed the MLI or multi-layer insulation so we can better see the inside of the spacecraft. Throughout Peregrine's journey, they'll keep an eye on the spacecraft's temperatures, pressures, power levels, and communication system. Solar panels at the top of Peregrine charge its batteries to power the spacecraft. Moving down towards the center of the spacecraft are the payload decks. You'll notice the decks have a unique isogrid pattern that we've used as an inspiration for a lot of our graphic design for the mission. This structure pattern optimizes the sturdiness of the payload decks while also minimizing its weight. Affixed to these decks are all 20 payloads. 20 individual pieces of cargo from 7 different countries are aboard these 2 main decks. Peregrine has 12 attitude control system engines, called thrusters, that are used to orient the spacecraft. You can see 4 large propellant tanks filled with monomethylhydrazine and multiple mixtures of oxygen-nitrogen, or MON, as oxidizer. Mounted to the bottom of the spacecraft are 5 main engines that will slow the craft down as it approaches the lunar surface. These engines use a hypergolic bipropellant pressure-fed system. Believe it or not, Peregrine will use the majority of its fuel in the last 15 minutes of the mission as we attempt a soft landing on the lunar surface. Peregrine has 4 landing legs attached to its base. These legs have a honeycomb structure on the inside that will crush to absorb the impact of Peregrine landing on the lunar surface. Peregrine is designed for an autonomous landing. That means it will use complex computing and a suite of sensors instead of human pilots. There are 2 antenna relays and a high-power transponder to relay communications between the spacecraft and the Astrobotic team. The relay will connect Peregrine with NASA's Deep Space Network, or DSN, utilizing the same dishes that communicate with the James Webb Space Telescope as well as other historic missions. And the last major feature of Peregrine is something you can't see. It's the hundreds of people who have worked on, tested, and gotten the spacecraft to the launch pad today. A shout out to the team we like calling the Astrobots, and a shout out to our payload customers who are sending their items to the moon with us.
Your continued commitment to science and lunar exploration is important for humanity.
The Peregrine Lunar Lander has 20 pieces of cargo.
由于整个发射任务时间非常长，会长到4个多小时的时间了。我们待会观察重点放在这个50分钟左右，就是说还有10分钟，这个有准登月着陆器能不能成功与这个半人马座进行分离如果能够顺利进行，我将会在往后为您 update 这一次任务成功与否。所以今天的转播会在这个登月着陆器分离后先暂时告一段落。
Hundreds of images, poems, music, nano objects, and earthly samples. Next, we have Colmena, a fleet of micro rovers and the first Latin American scientific instrument ever sent to the moon. Consisting of 5 small rovers, it will demonstrate a coordinated moon exploration. Lastly, we have the DHL Moonbox. Former astronaut Richard Garriott and thousands of others from around the world have sent small mementos to link life's meaningful moments with our nearest celestial neighbor. Now, this is just a snippet of the 20 payloads aboard Peregrine. Again, you can find the full list on Astrobotic's website. Now back to Megan.
We are now less than 10 minutes away from Peregrine separation, so let's get back over to the ULA team and Amanda Sterling to take us through that.
Thanks, Megan, and thanks to those of you who are still following mission progress of ULA's Vulcan Cert-1 flight. For those who are just tuning in, I'm Amanda Sterling, and I'm here at ULA's Advanced Spaceflight Operations Center at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. ULA's inaugural Vulcan rocket lifted off on its first flight test at 2:18:38 a.m. Eastern, and all systems continue to operate nominally.
Minute 1 second burn.
.还有大概7分多钟要进行分离。现在准备要进行第2次点火先。
LH2 pre-start.
现在要进行这个半人马座第2次的点火。
Coming up next is the second main engine start of ULA's Centaur upper stage. Let's listen in.
好的，现在进行第2次的点火，调整这个轨道路径跟方位。另外大概还要3分多钟，这个引擎要进行第2次的关闭，然后这个有准的这个着陆器要进行分离。
We have ignition, both rust, 2 good engines, everything looking good.
This is Vulcan Mission Control at T+43 minutes 57 seconds. As we approach Peregrine separation, let's learn more about the first spacecraft to launch in NASA's new CLIPS initiative to have American companies send its science experiments to the moon.
Astrobotic is a full-service lunar company. It starts with our terrestrial testing and development services that can build propulsion systems and test propulsion systems on Earth, to the sensors that make precision landing possible, to our rovers that will deploy down on the surface of the moon, to one day our power systems that will deploy on the moon and provide sustaining power for the infrastructure on the surface. Astrobotic is in all of those businesses, and we are in the business of making space accessible to the world, and the moon is just the beginning. The big thing that we're known for is our 2 lunar missions to go to the surface of the moon. Our first one is about to launch, and our second one flies in 2024. The Peregrine mission is important because it's among the first commercial missions to return to the surface of the moon. This is the first time as a nation going back since Apollo. It's the first time for 6 nations that could land on the surface of the moon with our mission. This is the dawn of a new era of affordable, routine, regular access to the surface. What that means is our nations and world scientists can access the moon on a routine, regular basis. They don't have to wait for the culmination of their career for one single super mission. They can go back again and again and again. It's the beginnings of learning about the resources on the surface of the moon and potentially one day turning those resources into something that we can use in space and maybe one day return back here to Earth.
Peregrine's development was a years-long process that included many people, like engineers, welders, and technicians, who designed and built the spacecraft. Landing a spacecraft on the moon is very complex. The team worked long hours to get Peregrine to the launch pad.
To be on the pad today with our spacecraft strapped to a giant 200-foot-tall launch vehicle ready to blast into the heavens it's a little surreal. It's a moment I've been dreaming about for 16 years. And to see it all on one rocket, it's terrifying and exciting and thrilling all at once.
Our Peregrine Lunar Lander starts its journey to the moon in Florida on a Vulcan launch vehicle. That will blast us into translunar injection, heading us straight out to the moon, where we will enter lunar orbit and start our descent down to the surface. At this point, engines are firing, all eyes are tuned in, and as we soft touch down on the surface of the moon, that marks the beginning of our surface operations and our payloads deploying.
As a nation and as a company, as individuals, we all persevere to overcome challenges, and we're going to continue to do that. And this first mission is just our first step, our first attempt to make space accessible to the world, and it certainly will not be our last.
好的，还有3分钟要进行分离。
This is Vulcan Mission Control at T plus 47 minutes 8 seconds. We're a few seconds from the second main engine cutoff. Here's Rob Gannon.
30 seconds to nominal MECO.
在47分37秒左右啊，半人马座的第2次引擎关闭。
We're going to open loop on PU. Coming up on cutoff. We have cutoff. Everything is looking good. And we are now in a 2-minute 49-second coast phase of spacecraft separation.
好的，发射后50分26秒，大概还有这个3分钟的时间，有准登月着陆器要跟半人马座进行分离。
And continuing to maneuver to our MES 2 attitude. And we're inside a minute and a half to spacecraft separation. Body rates are nulling out. And this mission does call for a roll spin for spacecraft separation of 0.5 degree per second. We'll be starting that maneuver shortly.
准备要进行分离。
This is Vulcan Mission Control at T plus 50 minutes 10 seconds. Vulcan has executed all mission events expected, and we are now approaching delivery of the astrobotic Peregrine commercial lunar lander into a highly elliptical orbit, more than 220,000 miles above Earth to intercept the moon. Let's return to flight commentator Rob Gannon as we approach
好的，你可以看到这个电脑示意图啊，就是这个有准登月着陆器已经跟半人马座成功进行分离。我们可以听到在控制中心响起一片的掌声。好的，火神半人马座火箭距离发射已经将近是51分钟左右的时间。目前飞行一切顺利，最重要的载荷，也就是这个有准登月着陆器已经成功跟半人马座分离，半人马座将会继续分离将运送第二具的载荷到太阳轨道去释放这个所运载的 DNA 以及这个骨灰胶囊。而这个有准登月着陆器预计在1个多月以后，也就是在2月23号预定会降落在月球表面，届时将会为您直播。非常感谢您收看今天的这个视频的转播也希望您喜欢今天的为您转播的这一次发射，也继续关注我们的频道，同时订阅，同时分享。谢谢您今天的参与，感谢。
To continue mission coverage. We'll be joining back in as we approach the final engine burn. Over to you, Megan.
Thank you, Amanda, and well done, ULA team. So throughout the broadcast, we have been telling you about the 5 NASA payloads that are flying on this mission. We've shown you in depth 3 of them, and now we have the final 2. So NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center has 2 payloads aboard today's flight, and one of those is the Peregrine Ion Trap Mass Spectrometer, its job is to understand the release and movement of lunar surface molecules like water. I'm the principal investigator, or the lead of the science team, for the Peregrine Ion Trap Mass Spectrometer. Good news,